Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our Star Wars faction series, which looks at various species within the Star Wars galaxy and analyzes their strengths and weaknesses. So far we've looked at Umbarans, Twi'leks, Hutts, and Wookiees. Today we'll be covering the delicious Ewoks. They're considered a culinary delight in most corners of the galaxy, and one of the more primitive species we'll be taking a look at in this series. Today we'll be starting off with their biological strengths and weaknesses, followed by their cultural strengths and weaknesses, and we'll end on their technological strengths and weaknesses. The average Ewok only grew to about a meter in height and usually weighed around only 50 kilos or 110 pounds. This meant that they were easily one of the smaller sentient species in the galaxy, but don't let their small size mislead you. These compact little guys were extremely strong and well adapted to their home in the forest moon of Endor. Only 4,900 kilometers in diameter, the moon of Endor was less than half the size of Earth, but its mantle was made out of dense metals like diorite and feldspar. This is why the forest moon's gravity is actually surprisingly high for its size. It's around 85% of Earth's gravity. The Ewoks' bones were so dense and strong that they were able to survive jumps from treetop canopies down to the forest floor. They were also physically strong enough to grapple and overwhelm much larger species like human beings. Observers of Ewok warriors in action have described them as little bears, or mini Wookiees. And it wasn't just their legendary strength that made Ewoks so deadly, they were also very well adapted to hunting in the dark. They had excellent night vision and a great sense of smell. The brave stormtroopers who survived the disastrous Battle of Endor had greeted nightfall with a sigh of relief, only to find out that their Ewok pursuers were twice as ferocious in the dark. And although Ewoks did kind of look like little bears, they actually had human-like hands with 2 fingers and 1 opposable thumb. Ewoks also seemed to have a pretty strong digestive system, which allowed them to consume a wide range of things for energy, including human beings. Despite being omnivorous, Ewoks were a common food source for a lot of different species across the galaxy. The Power Sliders Diner in Panara, for instance, was known for serving Ewok jerky. Throughout galactic history, hunters have journeyed to the forest moon of Endor to hunt the native Ewok population. Ewoks were considered a delicacy because of their high fat concentration and tender meat. Their soft and luxurious fur also fetched a good price in the deep core markets. The hunters considered an added bonus that Ewoks had extensive knowledge of local terrain and jungle survival. This meant that hunting them was a lot more challenging and interesting than hunting a dumb animal or some kind of monster. But still, the Ewoks' mental development lagged far behind most other species in the galaxy, and they were still kind of considered dumb. And while their short stature allowed them to hide in the underbush of Endor quite well, their short limbs greatly limited their mobility and speed on the ground. So if you are being chased by Ewoks, it's a good idea to place yourself in an opening or some kind of clearing so you can see them coming. Also, like the Wookiees, the Ewoks could learn to understand other languages, but their vocal system couldn't really pronounce words in Basic. The Ewoks were a very social and communal species. They lived in villages with large houses that could fit entire extended families. Some Ewoks would maintain villages near the sea or in the mountains, but the most common place that Ewok villages could be found in were treetops. The Bright Tree Village was a typical Ewok village. It housed around 200 Ewoks in multiple large families. Generally, the families with the young and elderly lived at the top of the forest, while bachelors lived closer to the bottom of the trees, where they could watch out for dangerous predatory animals. The Ewoks became so communal in the first place, most likely because of all the dangerous predators on the forest floors of Endor. The villages were usually run by an elderly chief who held council with other senior members of the tribe. The hierarchical structure did a good job at keeping the peace within the Ewok tribes. After the chief, there was usually a medicine man or shaman who performed religious rituals and also served as a healer for the village. Underneath him were the various warriors who kept the tribe safe and also provided food for the Ewok village. The Ewoks had to become quite talented warriors to make up for their tiny size. They also had to quickly learn how to hunt in large packs because most of the enemies or prey they faced were far larger than them. For instance, you had giant beasts like the Goraks, which were more than 5 times taller than a human being. The Ewoks were also smart enough to figure out how to use modern vehicles and gadgets relatively quickly and turn them against their enemies. Definitely don't be fooled by an Ewok's cute appearance. Their society was very warlike, and they rarely ever showed any mercy to surrendered enemies. Countless wounded Imperial soldiers had their throats slit by Ewok warriors during the Battle of Endor. Ewok society also has some similarities to the Wookiees, which we talked about in a previous episode. They had a more naturalistic view of the world. Instead of trying to dominate and control their surroundings as humans would, the Ewoks built their tribal villages in harmony with nature. This is why we see no major developments on the forest moon of Endor. Ewok villages rarely ever grew beyond a few hundred members, and there were no large federations or nations of different Ewok tribes. They were disorganized, lacked direction and focus. When the Galactic Empire arrived on the moon of Endor, they killed several Ewoks and even burned down an entire village. But it wasn't until the Rebel Strike Force arrived that the Ewoks were finally able to launch a counterattack. They were pretty much useless on their own. Despite creating permanent settlements all across the planet, the Ewoks mostly hadn't figured out agriculture. They were still hunter and gatherer societies. Hunter and gatherer societies expend much more of their energy gathering food, which means that there's very little time for creativity and innovation. And so in the Ewok village, instead of passing on knowledge to future generations, they bred xenophobia and superstitions. Which is why when the Ewok warriors from Bright Tree first encountered the rebels, they tried to cook them first, then only stopped when they mistaken C-3PO as some type of god. A lot of observers and war historians were shocked by the Empire's defeat on Endor by a small group of rebel pathfinders and a large mob of Ewok warriors. A lot of people were rightly confused about how something like this could actually happen. Well, for one, the Ewoks were a warrior culture, as I mentioned before, and although their weapons and tools were primitive, they were tried and well-tested and very functional in combat. The Ewoks used a wide range of weapons made from natural materials, and they were more than effective against the Imperial stormtroopers in all of their modern gear. Their spears, for instance, used sharp volcanic glass tips. Their arrows were dipped in potent neurotoxins. Even a minor scratch from this poison will cause the entire body, including many major organs, to shut down. Against larger prey, the Ewoks usually used traps like giant piles of rocks or spike traps. They were even smart enough to figure out how to create a catapult and master flight by creating a glider suit. These traps and weapons were particularly effective when used with an asymmetric warfare approach, which is exactly what the Rebel Pathfinders taught the Ewoks to do. While the Ewoks were definitely quick learners and natural tacticians, their primitive social structure lacked the means to accurately pass down information and new technologies to the next generation. The Ewoks had a very stagnant culture. Despite numerous encounters with advanced societies, they never really embraced modern technology, which could become a pretty big problem in the long run. Their inability to protect themselves, combined with how good they taste, made the Ewoks quite the target for hunters and meat connoisseurs across the galaxy. Both during and after the Battle of Endor, the Ewoks heavily relied on the Rebel Alliance and then later on the New Republic for survival. When the second Death Star exploded directly over the planet, instead of being immediately engulfed in falling debris and giant fires, the Ewoks were saved when the majority of the station's debris were intercepted by tractor beams from the Rebel fleet. Without actually embracing technology like the Wookiees and Twi'leks did, the Ewoks would always remain dependent on other factions. Following the Battle of Endor, many Ewoks would eventually be taught how to farm calf. Another group of Ewoks agreed to travel off-world and become therapy Ewoks, who would accompany Rebel veterans and help them recuperate from the war. And no, I'm not making that up. And unlike with a companion dog, you won't feel bad eating your therapy Ewok because they're basically, pre-marinated walking meat bags anyway. Those Ewoks that did make it off-world and weren't immediately consumed as food would eventually join the rest of society, proving to everyone that even Ewoks were smart enough to live in the Republic. One Ewok named Peepka even became a slicer or a computer hacker for the New Republic, which really isn't bad if you consider she most likely started off life swinging through the trees of Endor. Well, there you have it, guys. That is our information on the Ewoks. As usual here in Generation Tech, we seek to understand aliens better so that we can know how to counter them should they try to attack us. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of this series. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.